Oh, it's making me pause longer. Maybe I should listen to it. Okay, so the first skill that I talked about is tackling that information overload, making sure that you're protecting and taking care of your brain space, that if it's being overloaded and overrun, that you're handling that. The second skill that I'd like to talk about is the ability to observe. To observe, which is a very different thing. It's not something that we practice and are necessarily great at in our Western culture. The best way that I've heard it described, and I've heard this described this way by numerous people, is the idea of bird watching. And I don't know, do you guys bird watch at all? No? Bird watching, I don't do a lot of it. We do now, we just put a new window into our dining room, and so we've done lots of bird watching this winter. It's been amazing, but that's not something I'm used to doing. But the idea of bird watching is that if you go and you're bird watching, you are watching what birds are doing. You're not necessarily making any judgments about it. You're not necessarily reacting to it. You are just simply observing that this bird has this kind of coloring, or this bird seems to like this kind of berry better. You're simply watching and seeing what takes place. And this is a significant tool that we can use, especially in the midst of a pandemic. The ability to just observe as if we were bird watching, to notice, to see what's happening, and to not necessarily have a reaction, or we could eventually assign meaning like we were talking earlier, but the idea is that we pause and we observe. We see what's going on. We notice it. In the case of what we're talking about now, I think it is incredibly important to talk about noticing and observing people. And I think it is important for us to notice and observe all the people. I'm going to talk right now about the idea of variance of risk. It is really hard right now to consider that we have any risk in our world today other than COVID. But that is not true. We have so many risks that we are exposed to on a global level in our own communities. Each one of us has multiple risk factors that exist in our lives. For some of us, COVID is the greatest risk that we experience. For some of our loved ones, COVID is the greatest risk that they have. That is going to be their biggest risk. And I'm not going to get into the debate about, well, the survival rate is this, because it doesn't mean it's not a risk. That is the greatest risk for some people. But for a lot of people, that is not the greatest risk that exists. And it's very easy to get into a tunnel vision mindset that somehow COVID is the only thing that we need to address as individuals or as a community. When the truth is that there is such a great variance of risk that we are in danger of losing sight of that, and that the danger of that, honestly, is something that frightens me a little bit. But I think it's something that is important for us to do. In fact, I would say if there is nothing else that you hear from this entire night except for this, it is to understand the variance of risk that exists for you and how that is going to be different than what exists for even another family member or somebody else in our community. This week I have seen on Facebook, and I really loved this. It's a meme, and it says, "We are not all on the same ship, but we are all in the same storm." Did you guys see that? I think that is a great way to sum up this idea. In the beginning, we were kind of in this, we're all on the same boat, we're all in this together. And I think that this community aspect is something that's very true. But this idea of we are all in the same storm, but not all of us are going through it in the same way. We're not all in the same boat. The boat I am in is different than the one you're in, which is different than the one you're in. And I think it's super important for us to see that, to be aware of it, to observe it. We don't have to do anything or assign meaning to it just yet, but just to take the time to notice that the variance of risk that exists in my life or my family is going to be different than the one in my neighbor's. I think that's a key skill to be able to observe that truth. There's also a big skill, and there's something really important and valuable in the ability to determine the difference between reactions and what has happened by the initial cause. And what I mean by that is, I introduced this book back in March, The King, the Mouse, and the Cheese. Are you guys familiar with this story? So it's a children's story, and it is a story about there's this king, and he loves cheese, but there's a bunch of mice in his kingdom, and he doesn't want them to get a hold of his cheese. And so he consults his wise men, and he tries to think, how am I going to prevent and get rid of all these mice that are causing me such grief? And so he comes up with all these ideas, and one of them is that they bring in a bunch of cats. And so a bunch of cats come in, and sure enough, they chase away the mice, but the cats cause so much damage and the cats cause so much grief that pretty soon he's trying to figure out how to get rid of them. So then he goes to his wise men, and they advise him to bring in dogs to get rid of the cats. So he brings in the dogs, and he has the dogs chase away the cats, and the cats go away. But pretty soon he realizes that the dogs were actually worse than the cats. So he goes to his wise counsel again, and he asks, and they suggest to bring in lions. But sure enough, the lions chase away the dogs, and then the lions are worse than the dogs were. So he goes one more time and asks for help, and his counsel suggests that you bring in elephants to chase away the lions. And of course, the lions or the elephants are the worst of all the things that have befallen this kingdom. And so they decide to bring the mice back in. And in the end, they accept the mice, and they learn how to live in peace with the mice. Now, of course, a virus is not like cute cartoon mice. They're not the same thing. I'm not suggesting that they are the same thing. Instead, I'm suggesting that this book addresses several underlying ideas that are worth considering. One of them, which is understanding the difference between what is caused by the initial problem and then what is caused by our reactions. There's been a few times I've heard the phrase stupid COVID or stupid virus, and it's actually not complaining about something the virus has caused, but complaining about something that we have done, and we have done as a reaction to the virus. That's not to criticize or to suggest we're not supposed to do anything and we should just accept the virus and let it run rampant like the cartoon mice do in the community. But it's to suggest that there is a difference between the harm we cause ourselves and the harm caused to us by COVID. And I think it's worth recognizing, observing, and noticing the difference in what that is. I think it's also worth using the example of bird watching and observing, because there are bird watching groups, and the ability of a group of people to come together and to watch birds together, and how they can do that successfully is maybe something that we could learn from. When people get together and they observe and they watch birds in groups, they don't argue about what the other person saw. They don't say, you didn't see a bluebird, you saw a blackbird. Well, maybe they do. I don't know. I haven't spent a lot of time with bird watching groups. But ultimately, they get together and they share what they notice. They point things out. They take time to listen and to notice what somebody else is seeing that they might have missed. They're taking time to go, okay, I see that you're noticing something different than I'm noticing. It's two different observations, and we're not here to try to make something happen. We're here to observe together. And there's maybe a skill set in that, something that we could learn from in this scenario. The next skill I want to talk about is adaptability. There is strength in the ability to change and to let go of whatever is optional. And in truth, there is so much in our lives that is optional. It is it's actually something I've heard since I think I was in grade 4, is that the whole reason, one of the greatest reasons the human race has been able to survive is because they are able to adapt. They are able to change. And although that is credited to the human race's ability to survive, it is certainly not a skill set for each of us as individuals. That ability and willingness to adapt and to let go of things and to change as needed is not something that we are just easily accustomed to. But I think it is something that is very applicable in this scenario. There is change happening all around us. Some of us don't like it. Some of us don't want it to happen. And we have a choice. We can find the ways to be able to adapt and to let go of the things that really we don't need to fight for. And then there's the need to go ahead and to hold on to the things that we need to hold on to. The skill set number 4 is to be steadfast. And at first that seems like it's in direct opposition to the adaptability, but I think actually that you need this to do adaptability better. Let's go ahead and spend some time here talking about what it means to be steadfast. What does it mean to go ahead and to find something that you cling to that helps you stay on course, that helps you stay and decide what's worth not ever walking away from, what's worth not ever changing from? The first step is, if you're wanting to find a way to be steadfast, you have to find your bigger than. What is your thing that is bigger than anything else that could come up to, that is the thing you can cling to, that is the thing you can depend on, you can rely on, and it'll never change, never go away, and never leave you stranded in the midst of difficulty. We use things like, use terms like true north, bedrock, foundation stone, anchor. We use these terms to denote something that is so strong and so solid that we can build on it, we can hold to it, and it will keep us safe no matter what's happening around us. It's important that if we're going to find that thing that we're building on, it has to be bigger than anything we could possibly come across, such as a pandemic. To find our thing that's bigger than, we have to admit that life is more than just avoiding death. If our entire purpose, if the only goal that we are trying to achieve is to avoid death, I think we're missing something. I think that there is something that we have skipped a step, something that we clearly have lost if that is our only goal. We have to find something that is bigger, that gives us a bigger purpose other than let's just stay alive. We also have to find our bigger than thing and have that be our purpose for how we are living now. I was talking about the idea of this needs to be our ability to thrive, not just survive during this time. And I think this is the key part. If we can find our thing that's bigger than the pandemic, bigger than our fear, bigger than let's just stay alive, then we can find our thing to continue to thrive no matter what's happening around us. Because the thing we're relying on, the thing we have built our lives on, is bigger than the pandemic that's happening around us. I think it's important when we're picking that thing that we choose wisely. I think that there's this idea that if we just get enough information, then that'll be all we need. As long as we just know enough, then we can do that. But I think we've already discovered a little bit that that's not necessarily how it works, and that we need to have something bigger than just information to go on how we're going to go forward. What is it we're going to use to rely on in order to get through this, to thrive through this? And it needs to be more than just information, more than just data, more than just waiting for scientists to tell us this is what you do. I think it also needs to be bigger than just people. I know that this is a little bit of an issue right now. It's coming up in other ways too, that if we just trust people enough, if we just trust people to be good enough, then we will get through this just fine. And I think there's value in recognizing that people do have the ability to be good. People can be good, but people cannot be good enough to withstand everything that happens. People cannot be good enough to be able to have us get through this time of a pandemic and have it all be okay. People have limits. People have weaknesses. And I think if we're honest with ourselves and we know ourselves well enough, we can see that that is the case. And it's not just there's something wrong with me. That is the case for every single person. We have limits. We have weaknesses. We cannot be big enough to survive and to withstand it all. It also cannot be ideologies. And this is a little bit of a touchy subject right now. I know that for some of the conversations I've had. But the fact is that this is a combination of information and people. Relying on those two things that I just said are not strong enough for us to depend on. And putting them together does not make them stronger. It just combines their weaknesses. if we look throughout the history of the world, we can see that humanity on its own is not good enough to create paradise on earth. If we look throughout history, we can see that it's not just we need a good idea. If we have a good enough idea that people can cling to, then everything will be okay. It doesn't work that way. We cannot depend on information. We cannot depend on people. We cannot depend on ideologies alone to be able to do what it is to get us through the tough times. This is not just my preference. This is not just something, my opinion about. This is what I have bet everything on, is that it is actually God alone. God is the only one that is strong enough, big enough, smart enough to be able to rely on to get us through everything that is going to happen to us. And I think that it's important for us to know that that is not the same as saying religion or saying church. Those aren't the things that are big enough and strong enough. Those are made by people. Those are done by people in a way that they have their cracks and fissures in them too. God alone is the only one strong enough for us to be able to build our lives on and have it be a reliable, trustworthy source without crumbling. If we have that ability where we have built our lives and we are clinging to something so strongly, so stubbornly, that this is our one thing we're not going to let go of, and we are going to trust it alone, if we have that, it makes it even easier to cycle back to this skill of adaptability. If we have this one thing that we're like, I can change everything else, but this one thing I will not change, it makes it easy. It actually makes it a lot easier to let go of everything else. But to say, but this one thing I will not. And there is a strength and there is a firm confidence that happens when you're able to do that. To be able to say, everything else is up for grabs, but this one thing is the one thing I can cling to and find confidence in and find hope in. Which is why I would say this idea of the skill of being steadfast is another way of saying having faith. Faith denotes that you need to take risk. You don't have to have faith if everything's good, but you have to have faith when things are going tough and you're going to be risking something. And it also denotes something that we are willing to seek God first. When we put our faith in something outside of ourselves, it means there's a little bit of a selflessness, a little bit of sacrifice that has to happen in order to trust something else outside of ourselves first. Having this faith is saying God is good and God is able. It is saying that God is with us. It is not saying God is there to fix everything when we want him to. There is a little bit of I wouldn't even say it's a little bit, there's a big idea right now that God is going to fix all of this and prove that he's right and make everybody feel silly because he's shown his miraculous power by fixing COVID. I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's what he's ever tried to do. I think when his miracles happen, it does draw people closer to him. But God's biggest miracle, the one that we are in the midst of starting to celebrate right now, is the fact that God came to be with us in this place that has disease, in this place that has brokenness, in this place that has these bad things that happen that shake us to our core. God comes to be with us here in that place. He doesn't just fix it all to make it all better and easier for us to deal with. And that is a significant thing. That's the kind of faith that I am talking about when I'm suggesting that a skill that we have to be able to thrive in the middle of this pandemic is to trust in God alone and a God who is good and a God who is able. Skill number 5, perseverance. I feel kind of strongly that we can only get to this skill if we have the previous one. If we have faith, if we have the ability to cling steadfastly to something that is strong enough, we have this ability to be able to persevere. And I do have a passage I want to read. This has kind of been a passage I have gone to the last several months. It has been the one that comes up the most for me. And it is from Romans 5, starting in verse 3, We can rejoice too when we run into problems and trials, for we know that they are good for us. They help us learn to endure. And endurance develops strength of character in us. And character strengthens our confident expectation of salvation. And this expectation will not disappoint us. For we know how dearly God loves us, because he has given us the Holy Spirit to fill our hearts with his love. I've read this from the New Living Translation. In the NIV version, it's a little bit more simple. It says that suffering causes perseverance. Perseverance causes character, and I mixed that up. I knew I was going to do that. Suffering causes character. Character causes perseverance, and perseverance causes hope. It goes in that order. Sometimes we like to skip straight to the end part and go, we start with the hope. We have hope, then we're able to persevere. But in Romans 5, it tells us it's a different order. First we suffer, then we develop character. We develop these skills. We develop these ability to be able to cope with things. We develop the ability to thrive even in the midst of difficulties. Then we persevere. We endure. We get through it. Then we have hope. And I find that to be a significant way of understanding how we go through these difficult times. It's not we have hope, God's going to fix it, it's going to be all better, and we just put our head down and that's it. There's a whole other process that we go through, and in that process, the strength, the perseverance, the character that we develop all has this byproduct of hope. And that hope is a significant thing. It's not just a wish. It is something that is more solid and more firm for us to be able to cling to. For me, one of the bigger areas of that perseverance, that developing the character and getting through the tough times, for me, one of the biggest thing is being able to see the bigger picture. That is one of my main motivators when I am struggling and overwhelmed by what is happening around me, is taking time to see the bigger picture. I think it's important for us to take time to recognize what's happening for us in a historical context. We are living in a time where this is a historical moment in our lives. Some people have lived through wars, some people have lived through famine, some people have lived through oppression, some people have lived through multiple experiences. This is the time, at least in my life, when I am living through something that is of historical significance. And I find that to be helpful in seeing the perspective of what's happening around me. It makes it easier to not focus just on me and my struggles and the needs I'm having, but it also helps me to kind of be able to feel like, okay, other people have lived through these kinds of experiences. Other people have struggled. Other people have had their historical significant moments, and they've risen to the challenge. I know I could too. There's no reason that I can't. When I'm looking at this and seeing the bigger picture, I also like to not just look back from the historical perspective, but I also like to look forward 5 years from now. What would I like to be able to see from myself to have done? This is going to, we've been in this already for 8 months. I know everybody's clamoring for just a little bit longer to a vaccine. It's going to be longer. Even if we get a vaccine, this experience that we are having together, it's going to be longer. So 2 years from now, 5 years from now, how would I like to have felt about my time now? And that could go a million different ways. There's so many pieces to that. But it's helpful for me to be able to think about it in that bigger picture context. One of the biggest things, and this has been a conversation I've had with multiple people, is the need to be able to see beyond the guilt factor. First of all, I do not like this guilt rationale. I do not like this guilt reasoning because of the fact that it is a false way of thinking. The idea of, I don't want to pass on this disease because it might kill somebody, is a valid thought. When I was sick last year with pneumonia, one of my biggest concerns was coming to church and passing it on to Albin or Leela or one of the other vulnerable people in our church. That was a legitimate concern. However, I also had the concern of, if I don't do things, What's going to happen? If I stay home and I don't call anybody, I don't talk to anybody, I don't reach out to anybody, I stay home and I avoid every contact that I can, is there not bad repercussions to that as well? I think it's important for us to not be bogged down by the guilt, not only for ourselves, but also for us not to perpetuate it, for us not to be placing those guilt rationales on other people. We need to be motivated and to make decisions on something beyond guilt. Those things matter. Being concerned and caring about other people matter, but working from a place of guilt is not a productive place to work from. This is not an exhaustive list. All these skills that I talked about, the handling the information overload, the developing the ability to observe, the developing the ability to be adaptable and have faith, all of these things are not exhaustive. There's so many lists, so many things and skills that we can develop to help us thrive during this time. One of them, of course, being the fruit of the Spirit. The fruit of the Spirit is not just an opportunity for us to be super shining Christians and show how spiritual we are. The ability to have peace and patience and love and joy and hope and goodness and kindness, all of these things that are in the fruit of the Spirit, all 9 of them, they are for times such as this. That is what they exist for. Not for just to feel good about our lives and the way that we're doing. They are skills for us to utilize when things go wrong. It is never too late to dust off those skills that we maybe haven't used in a while, and it's never too late to develop and use new skills. I think it's an important thing for us to make sure that we're doing that we develop these skills for a purpose. There's a reason. It's not just to have them, but it's to use them. Because ultimately, with the purpose for any of these skills is so that we can respond well. And here we're going to take another break. We're going to pause for a second again.